Howdy, howdy, it's AJ. Gonna do a video here on overlapping. This is going to be the overlap test track exercise. I'm gonna give you just a quick intro to how to attack this. Not gonna be a very long video. This one is really just gonna kind of give you the very foundation you'll need. It's kind of going to be on top of the other video for the pendulum and all that. But very similar thing, only now we're kind of with an antenna, so it's kind of upward instead of downward, but you're going to be like, oh, okay, kind of the same thing. So let me just start right off. As this is going to move around, you're going to have some already done animation on the base there, and our goal will be to bring this all the way around the track and get it to, well, overlap. So when you are going to overlap something like this, you're going to have a tendency to drag the antenna where it's coming back from. So, like right off the bat here, you'll probably want a key right there. As we start to move forward, this is going to have a tendency to point backwards. So you can kind of do one of these. So as it starts to go, just kind of do one of those. Just add some drag. Now, as it starts to come around the corner, maybe if it's accelerating, you might want more bend. So maybe you'll really start to push that. And once you cross the corner there, this pendulum is not going to, or really antenna, is not going to swing out naturally. We're going to have to do that ourselves. It will rotate, so it's going to be pointing down the direction of the track constantly. But you want to keep in mind that if this is moving from left to right here, as it changes direction, this thing is going to have a tendency to swing out this way, right? So we're going to get into that, but what I want to do first is concentrate on the forward and backward, this kind of a bend in the object. So it is going to round the corner, and then it slows down here. There's a bit of a stall, so it's going to swing around, it's going to slow down, it's going to go backwards, and then it's going to start moving forward again. So we have to kind of figure out how would we attack this overlap. So one thing I like to do is figure out where the extreme happens and say, okay, well, if it's slowing down, this is going to have a tendency to shoot past that position. So actually, as it changes directions, this is going to have a tendency to flow this way. So now here's the problem. Your last key was at 10. That means that it is going to start to point forward all the way back here. So watch this interpolate, because it's going to just do it on its own, but it's going to slowly kind of transfer over there like that. This is a bit too slow, right? Like it's kind of like as it moves over. You don't want that. So we want to keep this bend, but actually as you whip around the corner, you're going to probably want more of a dip than you had before, because as it whips, it's going to, that's really going to send it. So you might want even further of a swing there, and then it might swing this way. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to place this key right here. You might even want this whip to occur like that at maybe even or as early as like 23, where it kind of swings around, and that momentum right here might carry right into this swing. Now, how that works, you can kind of play blast it. You can hit play if you want to feel out how that kind of is going to flow. Maybe you want this to occur a few frames earlier. Maybe you don't even need this key. You can test these things out, play around with it. So as this accelerates all the way around and it whips around the corner there, we can place a key right there. You might want to keep the key maybe down at 11. Just add more tilt like that as it swings through. And then, of course, once you come right around that corner, it's going to straighten out and shoot past, because it's going to start slowing down. So this whip is going to have a sort of momentum shift. As this comes around, it's going to want to shoot past, because this base slows down. So remember, what is leading the action and what is following the action. Whenever you think about drag, the pendulum or antenna here is going to be following the main action. But if this stops like on a dime, or at least slows down, the further you are from that base, the longer it's going to take for this to get the memo. So basically, as this starts to slow, this is like, well, I still have some forward momentum, so I have to play that out. So that's why this is going to have a tendency to, maybe even a little sooner, whip around that corner, hit that, maybe even bounce back slightly, like that, and then swing back this way, which you might want even more drag than that. Maybe we'll go a couple frames later. Give it something like that. And then, of course, on the way, the change in direction, you'll probably have more drag there. Not a lot, because we're just getting started here. But as it accelerates, notice that as it moves from right to left here, it's the same amount of curl in the antenna. You don't want that. You want it to feel like it's accelerating. So add a ton and let that interpolate. So from here, as it's starting to accelerate, you see how it's adding that bend as we go. And then you hit that rhythm section. So we'd have to spend some time in there. So what I'm going to concentrate on is basically just this section. As you go through, I'll show you an example animation. Basically, you'll see this. We have this whip. We'll take a look at just this section and see what needs to be changed, because of course animation is all about iteration. So as I'm looking at that, what am I looking for? So as you look at this, you need to be kind of concerning yourself with the fact that this momentum, as we switch around the corner, it's just kind of changing directions, but it doesn't actually contain that swing out. Remember that if you're making something realistic, it has to continue that momentum through. Even though this changes direction, that doesn't mean this will on the same moment. So we'll want to actually have a circular kind of whip around that way. And then even as we swing this way, do we want to tone some of this down, this little swing back and forth? I feel like maybe we could tone that down slightly, because it does come around the corner. It hits that point, which is not necessarily bad, but I might want to tone it down a little bit, or maybe tone this pose down so it settles in a little bit. That way it's kind of like losing its momentum. It wants to be straight up and down. So it's going to try to get there as soon as it can, but you don't want to do it too fast, otherwise it's going to feel rigid. It won't have that nice overlap that you're looking for. So right here, I think I could make it a little tighter. So let's do that. We'll do those few changes. So I'm going to grab this. Let's check that section out. So right here, as we overlap and then come back this way, I might tone this down just a little bit, maybe something like that. And for this, let's scrub through. Maybe this I might want a little bit less as well. Maybe something like that. And then here, maybe we can tone that down a touch as well, because it's hitting this extreme. And notice that as the bass moves, this is going to drag. And then once we hit this extreme here, it's going to then change directions. But if it starts to slow, that momentum is going to want to go straight up right. But of course, then the bass changes direction, so then it whips that over past it. There's some overshoot happening there. So play blast that, and then we'll look at getting this to not only work in one axis, but actually swing around in a nice arc. So that is the goal. We don't want this to just feel like it flows back and forth. You want it to kind of have three-dimensionality. So it's very easy to get caught up in like, oh, well, it looks good from this angle. Well, wait a minute. What if your animation is like from this angle? What if you're at a studio and this is like, I don't know, some cinematic in a game studio or whatever, and somebody comes in and goes, yeah, I like that animation, but actually the camera's going to be from this angle now. So it's like, well, okay, this is not going to, it's not going to make your animation sing as much. You do want to think three-dimensionally as you're posing this stuff out. Just because something might read well from one angle doesn't mean that you shouldn't really make it look good from as many angles as possible. Of course, when you're in film, you will have a locked camera in most cases, but even still, most trained eyes and even untrained eyes can see, yeah, you know what, that's not quite realistic. There's something wrong with it, and maybe they can feel it, but they don't know exactly how to articulate what's going wrong. So right here, this is how you add some arcs to your overlap. Just watch the top ball right here. As we swing around this corner, up to now we've been using the rotate Z, right? The blue one, which looks gold right now. There it is, now it's blue. We're going to add some rotate X, which is going to be swinging it this way. So check this out. As we come around this pose, bring it over this way, because as it swings around, you want it to kind of swing round. Like, you know, it's coming around the corner, so hey, you've got to add that momentum into this pose. So think of that in those terms. And then as it starts to come around, you're then going to straighten this up. So something like that. If you want, you can actually just zero it out. But it will swing around this way. It's going to hit this pose. Then see how it goes right from like this lean this way to this lean this way? Halfway between. Bring this over on the other side. So now, if you really play this out, think about the momentum. This is swinging sort of clockwise, right? It's coming around this way, and it then hits this extreme. It swings around that way, and then we're going to want to then zero out the rotate X. So what you get is a kind of rounded arc. You see how that kind of almost has a nice curly rotation? And then guess what? We're not done yet. You hit this pose, and then it continues to move that way. Well, there's nothing wrong with adding a little bit extra over on this side, and then you get a nice rotation that way. Zero it out again. And you see how we're building in a sort of intricate circular arc as this goes inward. And we're just slowly moving into a point where there's going to be very, very little rotate X. Because we're losing that momentum. Like this 3 degrees, I think, is even too much. Maybe we'll go like 1 degree. So really, really subtle. Like that. And then at the very end of it, once we hit this extreme pose, we'll straighten it out. Like so. So once you add all that together, and you give it kind of a 3/4 view, now it has a more realistic arc. It's kind of swinging out and around. It's taking that momentum from around the corner and adding that into the extra overlap that we did. So go ahead and add that to the rest of this with these little extra curls and twists and turns, and that will be this exercise. It's very helpful to understand how to attack and just get comfortable with the process of adding overlap to your keys, because you're going to have motions that might be complex that you're going to have to deal with, but you know, knowing how to add overlap on top of those things can really make it feel more realistic. It's probably one of my favorite of the 12 principles is overlap. So hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and take care.